this is the kind of research platform that they want to make sure that you disseminate through. So we've basically got a dedicated team that organize events and activities and support those projects in trying to disseminate them more broadly across the UK. We've got an international role as well. We're trying to bring in international speakers and so on. But our challenge is the decarbonisation of heating and cooling, but there are other network pluses, and they include for transport, bioenergy and energy storage and so on, and our other kind of sister network pluses on the hydrogen for transport. Network pluses are for everyone. If you're not on that list, then please send me a message and I'll add your particular title into that list. So basically, they're supposed to encourage everyone to get talking about the challenges of decarbonisation of heating and cooling. And obviously, that's a very broad topic. There should be an event, whether you're an academic, a researcher, someone from industry, a social scientist, an economist, a policy maker, or involved in the funding yourself. So these kind of forums should enable you to be involved and see what's happening. Because it's funded by the UK Research Council, there's no fee to attend our events. And of course, we want, and there's no kind of membership or anything, you kind of just turn up and then you're part of the club. Okay, so this Network Plus is a partnership which has been established across Durham, Oxford, Brunel, Heriot-Watt, Leeds and Northumbria. And we were established initially with these set of partners, but this is just how we've started. We built on top of a pre-existing thermal energy network and are planning to continue to grow this and bring more people on board as partners. It got kind of key objectives for the network. The first one is to grow a world-leading research network around the topic of thermal energy, so that we can all communicate together and let each other know what's happening. This is obviously a very timely topic at the moment. It's a big challenge. It's going to cut across residential, business, industry. It's going to be net zero relevant. So of course, lots of opportunities to be involved in a network which is going to be rapidly changing. The plan is to try and bring together lots of the different stakeholders across the technology, across end users and social scientists and policymakers. And we plan to do that through sandpits, workshops, the possibility of doing secondments, research studies and public engagement. And then of course, the key then is to try and get people from each one of those sectors to work together on different key cross-cutting challenges, and we'll try and do that through some of our flexibility funding, which we will announce how to get hold of in the near term. And then, mentioning that again, so we want to expedite the development of the state of the art and create opportunities. So this is where we've set aside some of the funding from our grant to support a flexibility fund, which will do some calls for research around in the near term, and then also it will also potentially support some secondments and travel bursaries to make sure that when we can travel to events, that no one's frozen out of that process. We have kind of set aside kind of 5 core themes that the network works around. The first is about the kind of core technologies that deliver heating and cooling, your heat pumps, etc., or gas boilers, and the key technologies and their surrounding systems for decarbonisation. And then number 2 there is the actual underpinning technologies, materials, control, retrofit, and infrastructure. So that would be potentially the equipment or the materials that underpin the primary energy technologies. We've got at a high level, we've got what's happening with the wider energy system. Obviously, that's obviously got key element related to economics. So economics is obviously a key part of that too. And then 4 and 5 there show the relation of the technology back to people, and how do you shape the future world in a policy and a leadership setting in order that we can transition to net zero with less pain, as possible. In terms of like the practical element of the Network Plus, we're planning to have activity around 4 key areas. The first one is co-organized events, and that's one of these events right now. And we plan to have many of these over the 4 years. We've been doing most of them online to date, but hopefully transitioning to real world in the near term. We have a budget for secondments, so taking an academic and getting them to work in industry for a while to solve problems in and around this challenge, and also travel bursaries to support early career researchers to go and travel to our events and activities. And as I mentioned, we've got some budget for multidisciplinary research feasibility projects. And there's also a role as well in and around roadmap development to try and explain what the key technologies in this sector are and how are they evolving, and to try and communicate that to a wider audience who are now taking an increasing interest in this particular area. So in terms of events and activities, I would highly recommend going to the Net Zero Research website, because you will find out A, when events are taking place, B, I think there's now about 30 different videos from presentations, talks and stuff that have happened over the last couple of months. They all go live, they're all recorded on there, so you can go back and look at what happened earlier this week, hopefully when Jackie's uploaded them, but also our historic activities as well. So please go on there. But you can also click and sign up for effectively a mailing list, so you'll know when activities like this are happening. And there are other platforms as well, if you're into social media, and you can also follow us through those too. But focusing now specifically on today, basically today's topic is heating and cooling sectors. It's organized into 3 parts. That after lunch we'll come back and we will hear from Keith Owen and Katy Janda about the industrial and commercial sectors. So this afternoon, starting in a minute or so, we will have 2 speakers, Keith Owen from Northern Gas Networks now, and then we'll be hearing from Katy Janda as well. So Keith is the head of systems development and energy strategy. He's a chartered engineer who began his career with British Gas in 1991, as he had a variety of roles within the industry during his career. I guess he's led the Northern Gas Networks H21 program until mid-2019 and sits on the High Deploy program steering board. He chairs the IGEM Hydrogen Committee, which is working to revise all Institute of Gas Engineers and Managers standards to incorporate hydrogen as the low carbon gas for heat.
Okay, thanks very much, Andrew, and good afternoon, everyone. I guess I've got this 20 minutes to cover. I think industrial was how it was labelled. So it's worth saying before I start the slides that I'm trying to give this quite a broad brush approach to the subject of hydrogen, as I represent a gas network, so we touch a great deal of points in all of this. So let me just get into that straight away and look forward to the questions at the end of it. So there we go. So a little bit about us then, just very quickly. So yes, I represent Northern Gas Networks, covering that geographic area that you can see there with the red boundary. We're split into 2 discrete geographic zones, which are part of the original what was British Gas Networks back in the nationalised industry days. So that gives you a sense of where we fit in the wider UK footprint. There's some fast facts there. It just gives you a sense of the sort of energy that we're moving around our network, that gas energy, as it were. Just to put into context the overall energy discussion for the UK, which is even more prescient given the government's announcements just this week to tighten up on the carbon targets, which is great news. So that's a little bit about NGN. I first wanted to reflect on where we are with government announcements, government thinking, and notwithstanding what we've heard this week, I thought it was useful to reflect on the 10-point plan of November with the variety of elements that they'd listed there. And it was a really useful starter for 10, I suppose, to kind of phrase, give us a sense of where the government was thinking and the areas that they felt were really important to help us along this way towards a net zero future. So I just started playing around with that on a slide just to get a sense of how might all those things plug together. This is my view. It might not be everybody else's view, but it's clearly looking at how we advance the development of green electricity in a quite significant way in terms of wind and nuclear. But it was interesting to see that carbon capture was and storage was also in there as a key implementer of what the future might look like. Both of those I see feeding into both zero emission vehicles, into the production of hydrogen, and you can see how all of those things start to interplay. The production of hydrogen being driven by a very large expansion of both nuclear and renewable electricity. And then, of course, all of those then feed into the transport agenda, decarbonising buildings, and then the larger fleet of transport, shipping and so on. And then wrapped around all of that, you clearly need a mechanism to finance and innovate. And then what that delivers is the natural environment that we're looking for. So that was my interpretation of all of that. And I guess the important thing to consider here is what comes next. And we've heard from government this week, which is really, really positive. In that sixth carbon budget, really tightening up, setting the UK on the front foot globally. I'd expect then, in setting those targets, what we'll hear next is a very clear policy statement, perhaps sometime during the summer, where we start to understand what tools in the box, what mechanisms might government bring to the table to accelerate and enable us to deliver some of that really insightful work that they've put into this next carbon budget, all of which leads to net zero. And I think, not to repeat what the Prime Minister said, but I can't remember his exact phrasing. It was always colourful, of course, but really highlighting that the importance here is it's about growth, jobs, and delivering low carbon. This is a really positive opportunity, which enables us to net zero. So just quickly wanted to review that and give a sense of thinking, certainly from our industry, on the positivity we read into all of this. In terms of what the industry is up to then, there's a major programme of work through the Energy Networks Association called Gas Goes Green, which is what we're all trying to achieve. And within that, 6 work streams covering a wide area of impact, which you can see on the screen in front of you. I'll not read those out. You've probably read them already. So do please go onto the ENA website, have a little look at what's happening there. There's quite a lot of really good work sitting underneath each of those work streams, and that's an ever expanding portfolio, which is very, very positive. Alongside all of that are the very significant investment and innovation projects that we've got going on. So that list that you see running across the bottom there, from H21 through to High4Heat, H100 and so forth, are all of the different types of hydrogen or hydrogen-related activities to enable us to understand how we might move away from natural gas. And I suppose I could cluster those together in that if you looked at H21 and H100 there, high NTS and high net, they're all looking at the 100% hydrogen position. So completely replace natural gas with hydrogen in the gas infrastructure. And the differences between those being the pressures that you might be operating at. High NTS is a transmission sort to, broadly 80 bar of pipeline pressure. HyNet is looking at it from an industrial perspective, and both H21 and H100 are looking more towards the domestic end of the market. Hy4Heat, again, currently the sort of domestic and commercial market is a government project, £25 million government project to develop hydrogen cookers, fires and boilers, both from a domestic and a light commercial perspective, and also some hydrogen metering as well. And then wrapping all of that together is the future billing methodology. And what that's looking at is how we accurately bill consumers for the energy that they're consuming. And that's really important as we start to change gas composition, because it's all about the energy content of the gas, which is currently metered volumetrically. So it's important that we get that right. And then HyDeploy is a slightly different project to all of those, in that it's looking to blend gas, hydrogen gas, into the existing network. So it's a forerunner of perhaps the 100% position, and gives another pathway to help towards this ambition of net zero. So that's a scamper through some of those activities. Do please visit the websites that you can see there. There's some really good, insightful information from both ourselves within NGN for H21 and from our other colleagues across the gas industry. So there's an awful lot going on. It's a really exciting time. I'll very quickly focus on another aspect of research, which is through the Institution of Gas Engineers and Managers. So our industry is our industry standards are all held by IGEM. They've been created with industry and with IGEM over many years as a result of the move from town's gas to natural gas, and then now we're looking to transition to hydrogen. So there's a huge number of documents there, very detailed science-based documents which provide the standards our industry rely on. So all of those are under the spotlight to understand what the impact of hydrogen might be on those standards, and to create some supplements that will allow us to continue to design, manage and operate gas infrastructure in the UK in a safe and reliable manner as we transition to this low carbon gas. So that gives you a sense there of some of the things that are going on. I chair the Hydrogen Committee, which you can see there, which is leading that work. We've recently set up, as a consequence of the discussions within the Hydrogen Committee, a gas quality working group to really understand the context of what's required there, the parameters to be adhered to for gas entry in this new hydrogen world, and so forth. And that's a really important working group, given its direct relationships both with IGEM, BSI, and the European committees, the SEM committees, which are all looking at the same sort of thing. So it's that collaboration and that communication of the science and the thinking that's really important. So that gives you a sense of how we're evolving the standards. There was another piece of work that was done through IGEM just recently with the support of BAYS, which is a bit of a UK first, probably one has perhaps more global impact than that actually. But we've developed something called the Hydrogen Knowledge Centre, which will be is rather a central repository for all of the research that we can lay our hands on, both within the UK and globally, into one single one-stop shop, I suppose. So it's a really important next development, so that we can understand what's out there and avoid unnecessary cost repeating research that already exists. So it's a really important resource for industry, for anyone that is looking to develop their understanding of hydrogen and how that interacts with whatever system they have at their disposal and so forth. So I would thoroughly recommend you investigate that. It's been open access for the last month or so. It will remain open access, so please do have a conversation there. There are certain documents that will remain behind a paywall process. They're IGEM's own IP, their own copyright, and indeed, if there are other reference documents that sit behind paywalls elsewhere, then this website will, this facility rather will highlight that to you. You'll see where that's located, and you can determine whether or not you wish to gain access to that information. But it's a really important pointer to where this information lies, and all you need to get access there is on that slide. So please do have a look at that. So just focusing on some of the projects then, and within Northern Gas Networks, we've been working with our collaborative partners, who you can see at the bottom there, and through funding by our regulator, on the development of this H21 programme. And what I've done here is just summarise the various phases of that work, where we're getting to with it all, onto a single slide, so it makes it easy to follow our thinking, our strategy here. And phase one was very much thinking along the individual component level, that singular asset, a section of pipe, a valve, and so forth, and testing all of those components for both their ability to convey hydrogen and whether or not they leak hydrogen, which is an important test. And then the other aspect of that work was understanding if hydrogen does escape from the integrity of our system, what are the consequences of that? And those questions are never quite as simple as you might imagine, because gas behaviour is a complex science. So we've been working with the health and safety labs and also a company called DNVGL. What you see at the bottom left there is the facility we created at the Health and Safety Laboratories Science Division over in Buxton, so we can carry out some significant and very accurate testing, harvesting parts of our asset from across the UK, lifting buried assets, taking them to site and putting them through those tests. The building that you can see just next to that picture is a terrace building that was created at the DNVGL Spade Adams site, and that was all about the consequence testing. How does hydrogen move through soil structures, the fabric of a home, and so forth? And all of this is a replica of the type of tests that were undertaken way back in the sort of late 60s, early 70s, I suppose, as we moved from Towns gas to natural gas. So very much at that individual asset basis. Phase two of the work was coming up a level with a connected system. How do we, it's all well and good knowing how a 2 or 3 meter section of pipeline might operate, but what happens when all of this is connected together? So what we've created at the up at the Spade Adams site, building on from that terrace building you can see there, is we've created a micro gas grid, try to replicate as many of the things that we would ordinarily see across the UK in a small, confined and controllable space. And that's been added to by National Grid, who have bolted on their Future Grid project, which I believe Durham University have a part in, to really understand from the transmission level to the distribution and then all the way into the consumer home, what does it look like to convert a gas network? How does that operate? How does it perform? Where are the issues? And from an operation and a management perspective, how can we control that, and what changes do we need to make to our procedures to do this in the same safe and reliable manner that we do now? Throughout both of those phases, we've had strong social science research, which is really starting to understand not just the technical and scientific aspects of the hydrogen molecule and how it impacts our infrastructure, but understand from a human perspective, what does this mean to the person that's looking to replace their natural gas boiler, perhaps with a hydrogen boiler, for instance? What is the perception there? And that research will continue to really engage with consumers and understand that we're doing the right thing. And as you might imagine, with all of this, moving from phase two, where we've got unoccupied trials, as you see there, the thought process then starts to move towards what the government are indicating in the 10-point plan. How do you get to a hydrogen town by the latter parts of this decade? So, thinking about, well, let's take these in baby steps, carry out a hydrogen village trial before we then go to a hydrogen town, which, by most measures would be several thousand consumers. and quite a piece of work to undertake. So that gives you an idea of the thinking and the strategies that we've got in place to transition our network from where we are now, natural gas, to move it to 100% hydrogen. And clearly, with the government's announcement, the focus will be on how some of these processes can be accelerated, working with supply chain to get those cookers, fires and boilers to market as rapidly as possible, and to make this as simple and as painless, I guess, as we possibly can. So that's a little bit about H21. HyDeploy, I might have mentioned earlier there, is looking at blending hydrogen into the network. And one might ask, why would you bother? I think it's a really important step to take, in that if we consider the conversion of the entire UK gas network from natural gas to hydrogen, that's not something that happens overnight. You're talking north of 20 million domestic connections plus everything into industry. It's an enormous undertaking. So as an interim measure, it's really important that we get blending up and running in the UK. That not only helps to decarbonise the gas network, it provides an option for the electricity network to have somewhere to put their power generation when their network can no longer take it, but they're still able to generate, which currently they're just, switching off wind turbines, which seems a dreadful waste. So there's lots of really good positives about the blending of hydrogen into the system, and the HyDeploy project is hard at work there to prove the safety case and get that into a position by 2023 that it can start to move us towards a business as usual proposition. A more recent development is at our Integral facility, and I'll talk a little bit more about Integral in a moment, but what we've done work in collaboration with Cadent and again with Bayes is we've developed a property on site where we can demonstrate all of the products that have been developed through Hy4Heat, so the cookers, the fires and boilers and metering and so forth. So we got, for the first time in the UK, a facility to bring to life, to demonstrate these new products, which are able to combust and provide heat through hydrogen gas. So it's a really important development. It does a bit of myth busting, I suppose. It helps to articulate more clearly what it is that the future looks like, certainly from a gas industry perspective, and it's a really positive step forward. So we're looking to launch that in the very near future with those products, bring stakeholders to site, and really point a finger towards UK ingenuity, innovation and research, which has developed all of these products. So really exciting next step for us there. And then just quickly to close out in the last couple of minutes or so, I just wanted to dig into a little bit more about that Integral facility that we're busy developing. It's important to recognise that hydrogen is just one strand of how we decarbonise, and there's a whole raft of other issues that need to be accounted for. After all, hydrogen is just the fuel source. There is all of the social science, the regulation, the impact on utility, the impact on either the industrial sector or the domestic sector and so on. What does it mean for the electricity networks in terms of opportunity and so forth? So it's really important that through the Integral facility, we can bring all of that together. Now, what we've been doing, we had a research session a few months ago now, trying to dig into that. This gives you an insight into some of the thinking, 4 particular areas there through the Integral research group that we wish to follow, and I'm sure this will expand as we progress. But thinking about the impact on consumers, what digital technologies might enable this to be a better solution. By enabling this, I mean whether that's an electrical heat solution, whether it's a hydrogen heat solution. What skills do we need, and how can green growth be enabled? So all of those things are really important to us, and something that we're very keen to explore and work with both academic and industrial partners and stakeholders to drive some of these answers out as quickly as we can. And then finally, I just wanted to introduce the Customer Energy Village. So this is a bit of work that we've been developing with support of some funding from the North East LEP to create the designs for the village. And this will be an area where we can really start to understand how you decarbonize the millions of homes that are already out there, not future home tech, thinking about the bricks and mortar that already exist. And that's important because there's 20 odd million properties out there that have a range of thermal efficiency issues and so forth, and have a range of sizes and shapes. So it's very important that we can try and understand the retrofit challenge. So I'll quickly spin this video up and give you a sense of what we're looking to develop. And what you'll see in a moment, the camera will just cut round to the hydrogen house, which is already there. So it gives you a sense of how we're building up the location. And just in camera at the moment is the three property terrace. And that's a 1910 design, 2-bedroom terrace. So very reflective of the sort of properties you'd see anywhere in the Northeast or the UK, actually. We then quickly move on to a 1950s bungalow. Again, different thermal properties, completely different type of building. In center focus there is the 1990s detached, so much more modern design, better insulated. You'll have noticed just see the left-hand side there, the brickwork of the 1970s flats, again, pretty dreadful in terms of thermal efficiency, and again, a whole raft of different challenges, and finishing off there with the typical 1930s detached building, which is by far and away the biggest property and consumer of certainly heat energy. So lots of really exciting things that we wish to do there. I'm conscious I'm over time by a little bit, so I will stop there. But welcome questions at the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith, and thanks for showing my house. So next is Katy Janda. Katy is a Principal Research Fellow in Organisations and Non-Domestic Buildings at the Energy Institute in University College London. Katy investigates energy demand from a social technical perspective, focusing on technological innovation, organisational decision-making and energy policy. She's co-I on iNumber, which is an India-UK project based on helping cities to reduce their energy demand and improving their electricity and water services. She's led research on energy management in the retail sector, data use and ownership patterns in the commercial real estate industry, and multiple benefits of energy efficiency. So Katy, please take it away.
Well, now for something completely different. I wanted to appreciate Keith's view of the large technical system, which is, although it's complex, it's relatively unified. And I think the description of, the calm description of the progress towards a unified goal is very, very different than what I'm going to describe in my talk. So most of what I'm talking about today is really an introduction to thinking about organizations and non-domestic buildings, which is a topic that has really been understudied in the energy field. And if I may just say that what Keith showed, I think is a in terms of the focus on housing, is a really good precursor for what I'm not going to be talking about. I want to focus on complexity and cooperation because there are so many non-domestic organizations and buildings that we really don't know very much about. And so to make net zero occur, we're going to need to work with those organizations in a much more cooperative way than we have to date. So if we talk about reducing fossil fuel consumption, we know that households are directly responsible for about 1/3 of the energy use in most countries. But that really means that organizations, including industrial and commercial firms, government agencies, and other nonprofits, account for about 60% of energy use worldwide. Yet, I think when we think about the building sector, we tend to focus on houses and not on non-domestic buildings. There's reasons for that, as Keith mentioned. There's many of them. They are the larger percentage, as a use class. But what that means is that we end up having kind of a myopic view of we imagine that a village is only composed of houses. And so, of course, the gas grid delivers gas to a lot of other different functions and provides all other kinds of. I'm sure that Keith is well aware of the other ways in which we use gas. But sometimes I feel like it's just simpler to think about gas as domestic boilers. So I want to talk a little bit about energy efficiency. I apologize, I've not been able to participate in the rest of this conference, so I don't know exactly what topics have been discussed. But it's just to point out that carbon reduction requires not just an increase in renewable supply, but also an increase in energy efficiency. And in most measures, it's about half of the solution. So we can't just replace our existing supply with something that's low or zero carbon. So if we talk about energy efficiency, there's longstanding claims that it's a free lunch you're paid to eat. There's talk about low-hanging fruit, 20-pound note on the ground. And more recently, there's a lot more discussion about how actually we can, that the markets, there's a lot of money there, that the retrofit market will exceed 1 billion by 2017, close to 2 billion by 2027. There's an energy services market, which is growing. There's an energy software market. There's a lot of money to be made in this area, but it's still very confusing. This is a slide that I borrowed from the work that I was doing on energy management in the retail sector, which is how retailers see energy opportunities, which is that there's lots of different things that they could do, but it's not really clear what they should be doing, what works best for their portfolio and their business strategies. And then government puts in incentives and regulations and information programs, which don't necessarily help the individual organization understand what its best strategy is going forward. I want to focus a little bit on data quality. I mentioned that there's sort of a focus on residences as opposed to non-domestic. Most of the rest of the talk is going to be talking what we do know about the non-domestic stock. But this is just for comparison, that if we look at the spider plot of residential data quality, Europe has a relatively good representation of data quality across a number of different factors. The US also has a good coverage. Again, this is residential. China, slightly less good. India has less information overall. When you compare that to residential and non-residential, that's the residential plot. And you look at the spider plot for non-residential, what you see is that almost all of the areas shrink, except for the US, which has collected information about non-domestic buildings since 1979. And actually, India also grows because they first started regulating non-domestic buildings and have now switched to residences. So they did things backwards from how Europe has done things. So how do we understand the non-domestic sector? And by we here, I mean the UK. We don't really understand the sector. The government statistics have been on sort of individual buildings over time, and then that's been massaged into a data set. There has been a relatively recent building energy efficiency survey done, but basically we don't understand the sector as a whole. We don't have enough data about it. So we're gathering data. This is some work from My colleagues at UCL who are thinking about, they've developed a 3D stock model of London, which they're hoping to be able to extend to the rest of the UK. Sorry, we'll go back here. And that basically, a commercial building is rarely just a commercial building. So this is an example of, you might look at the buildings as the vertical elements, but the premises cross the buildings in a lot of different areas. And so how do you untangle the building and the different use type of the premises, which then may go across some of those areas? But there's a lot of, there's 1.5 million non-domestic premises with a total floor area of 600 million meters squared. There's a lot of non-domestic stock. If you model these out, you can see that factories, warehouses, shops, and offices, you can look at the differences between the number of buildings and the floor areas, which is what this graph shows. This is Bees, which I mentioned is the most recent and only to date UK building energy efficiency survey for the non-domestic stock. And this is, for instance, a percentage of floor area where they asked people how old their boilers were. And, there's a lot of people who don't know, say in retail. Is that because nobody knows, or because the person they talked to didn't know? It's, retail premises are bought and sold a lot. Sometimes it may be in the main part and part of the landlord instead of what the tenant has. It's a complicated area. That's basically the point of that slide. Geographically, it's also complicated. This is a slide also taken from 3D stock and work from my colleagues at UCL, showing on the ground floor premises of Camden that it is, those yellow bits are mostly shops and the pink is offices. If you look at the first floor, the shops go away and the offices start to come in because shops are usually on the ground floor, not exclusively. But it just shows you that there's so many different layers to understanding what a single building is in the non-domestic space. So if you think about what mixed use is, then you have the ownership question. So these are use classes where that blue color is basically owner occupied, and the other colors describe different types of mixes, either like shops and offices, and tenanted premises, shops and offices and domestic. I'm not going to go into all the classes, but just to say, across the different sectors, there's lots of different mixes of owner occupation and different uses within the same premises. I've put this on because I stole this from a report that we're doing for Bays, and really it shouldn't be distributed. So that was just a glimpse. What does all this mean? I think what it means is that we need to work with, it's not that the data don't exist, it's that they don't exist in either academic or public hands. And so we need to start to think about research in the non-domestic sector that is really much more cooperative. We're used to thinking about the non-domestic stock in this sort of top-down way, which I've just shown, thinking about national, international policies. But that tends to be what I would call a physical and technical approach, where it's all buildings and no decision makers. We don't look at the organizational aspects and the ownership models that go along with these buildings. On the other hand, we also have a lot of research, case studies of individual buildings of owners. So that's a bottom-up approach, which has limited scalability of results. And there's a huge number of cases. So the question is, how do we combine these two different approaches? And I do work looking at change from the middle out. I'm not going to go into the basis behind this, but for this research or this talk, what this really means is analysis of commercial real estate portfolios and firms, and trying to understand what is the business of these non-residential buildings and premises. So middle actors matter in the commercial real estate industry. This is the global real estate sustainability benchmark, GRESB, which is all across the world at this point. It started in 2010 and has been growing really pretty much exponentially. It works within ESG, which is environment, social and governance issues in commercial real estate. And it's just to show you that that the numbers at the top are actually portfolios. They're not numbers of buildings. So within a portfolio, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of square meters represented. But it's the ownership and the usership that is important. If we're talking about ownership and usership, I think the way in which most policy perspectives and also academics tend to think about, or at least in the energy field, about buildings, we tend to focus on this type here, which are owner-occupiers, and we assume that they're data rich. There's actually 6 different types of relationships between data and space. There's the data rich and the data poor, which are loosely segmented into data rich would be groups with automatic meter readings and energy manager. There's still a lot of manual meters and no energy managers across the non-domestic stock. And then, of course, there's lease space, which separates into landlords and tenants. And this is just a very quick overview of that. But if we even look into that type A and what we imagine a data-rich owner-occupier would look like, we would imagine that in a retail space, perhaps there's a one-to-one correlation between the energy feedback and the energy manager, that the data are easy to obtain, that there will be predictable patterns and anomalies will be obvious and easy to troubleshoot. We assume that the portfolio is standard and consistent, and we assume that the energy management goals might be multifaceted to reduce out of hours base load, reduce energy and use, and prove reduction strategies. In reality, it's much more complicated. You have all this data, but it doesn't make sense in itself. So you have limited internal capacity. So one energy manager for at least 600 buildings. There's third-party consultants who come in to make up for the shortfall. The portfolio is not standard or consistent, and more often, meters are often wrong when we've done the analysis and looked at it. So the information you have may not be actually information that is useful. We found that all organizations are concerned about energy to some degree, but there's a focus on out-of-hours use, not absolute energy consumption, and it's difficult to account for costs over time. So there is information about, there are groups trying to provide turnkey solutions for these kinds of groups, identifying retrofit opportunities across all assets. So this is very good for the larger portfolios, again, the sort of data-rich groups. But if you don't have your data and you can't hire fancy consultants to analyze your data, where are you left? So I'm going to focus just a moment on this notion of landlord-tenant engagement, because, again, there's different kinds of landlords and different kinds of tenants as well. So this is in the ESG area. You have leaders and you have laggards. So if you have a landlord who is only interested in business as usual and a tenant who is only interested in business as usual, usually the relationship between the tenant and landlord is somewhat adversarial, and the lease does not incorporate environmental considerations typically. If you have a landlord and a tenant who are both interested and in improving their environmental portfolio, then you can come up with green leases, which is a co-evolution of improvement, where landlords and tenants cooperate to share costs of physical improvement and also data. Again, because the building is actually jointly shared in some ways. If you have a green tenant and a brown landlord, the tenant has to lead the landlord. But the problem is that generally the landlord provides the lease. And so unless it's a powerful tenant, you have difficulty with the tenant trying to lead the landlord. So generally, this is the space where you see activity in the market right now, is mostly the landlords trying to think about making changes to their property in line with net zero goals. Just going to run through very quickly some opportunities and challenges for innovation. There's a lot of work with prop tech, fintech, and green tech, which is mostly digital. Software players in some of the research we've done are usually small startup companies. Clients for these services are mostly international commercial real estate firms. Right now, existing software platforms don't deliver global solutions. Why is that important? It's because many of the these large commercial real estate firms are global in nature. And so they have properties all over the world, and they're trying to think about how to manage their portfolios, even though their buildings are in different places. The business-to-business solution of private software firms working with commercial real estate firms really poses questions about data ownership and availability for public good, which is where we go back to this notion of cooperation as well. And again, it's a centralization and concentration of power and economic viability, moving more and more towards larger companies. And I think from a policy perspective, there's some concerns about that because what do we do with small and medium enterprises and the challenges that they have? I can say some things about minimum energy efficiency standards and developing possibly an underclass of buildings that are rated so poorly they will be unable to be let, and who is going to deal with those buildings. So compared to government-led initiatives, would an industry-led energy efficiency activity pose risks or benefits to society? Will market actors with smaller portfolios suffer, including SMEs and the data poor? And will the commercial real estate industry be able to support change from within at a level that really matters? So my question is, what can policy and research community do to help? And that's why I'm not going to go into this. We don't really have time, but really thinking about it's a socio-technical question to improve the built environment. So I'm just going to summarize by saying net zero will require cooperation. That the myth is that the world is full of data-rich owner-occupiers. Technologies will adopt themselves and smart meters will deliver insights all on their own. And the reality is much more complex, that there are a lot of different actors in the non-domestic space, landlords, managing agents, and tenants. Within those groups, there's international real estate investment trusts and local landlords who have different operating budgets and different ideas. You have online retailers who mostly have warehouses and not shops, and then you also have corner stores. From a data perspective, the data do not analyze themselves. I've heard a lot of quite interesting reflections from people in the commercial real estate sector who have, there's data rich and there's data richer. I heard somebody from a privately held global real estate firm talking about how Google is able to match their energy portfolio in real time to renewable sources. But that's because it's Google. They have a lot of whizzy data analysts, which most commercial real estate firms can only dream of. And academic policy and industry policy groups and industry need to cooperate to reach net zero carbon. I mean, the same person was talking about how they got a summer intern in to be able to analyze their data on what was happening during COVID and how their tenants we're actually responding to being in the office or not being in the office. There's a lot of questions raised by additional data, which are not necessarily obvious in these shared spaces. So with that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I think, yeah, good to hear some different perspectives